else can you tell me? Some children might see 4, a 2, and a 2. So now we're starting to think about the number 8 and the composition of number 8 in different ways. So really quite interesting there. Rebecca's mentioning about the thumbs used for I have an answer. Yeah, absolutely. So I have an answer, one answer, and then have I got another answer? Have I got another strategy for solving this? And so on. So there's different ways that you can utilize those signals really, isn't there? Excellent. Now, also thinking here, we could take, oh, I wonder if anybody noticed what happened then. Let's have another look. So there could be something underneath the splat. Can the children see what's underneath the splat? Can they subitize it? So that was a quick flash, and I could see that there are 3 dots there. And we can have that discussion about how does that affect the total? So if we've seen that we've got a 4, a 2, a 2, and a 3, how does that affect our total? But what we could also do is perhaps give the children an aim or a target number. I know somebody was mentioning countdown in the chat at the beginning when I said what sort of strategies do you use. If we put the target number of 11 up there, can the children think about how that could be structured underneath the splat? Or perhaps they could think about it as double-sided counters. So here we can see we've got 2 red counters at the top, 2 red counters at the bottom, 2 yellow counters underneath the 2 at the top, and so on. I wonder what would be underneath the splat then. Pop in that chat box what could be underneath that splat. Think about the colours. Could we have red? Could we have yellow? Could we have all red? Could we have no yellow? Let me know. Alison, I love that idea where you hold it at height. Hold your thumb up at a height. Lovely. Hilary, how many all yellows? I wonder. Kerry's going for 2 red, 1 yellow. Hilary's telling me 3 yellows. Is there another way to do this? And we could start to think about all the children's answers. Look at these coming through now. Some that are similar, some that are slightly different. I wonder if Alison's answer of 1 red, 2 yellow is the same as Erin's answer of 2 yellow, 1 red. We can start to explore commutativity there then. So we can see how we're looking at that link. Now let's take a look. I've got 3 red under my splat. That doesn't mean it's the only answer. We can explore all the other possibilities as well. It's also really nice when using images such as this to link it to that abstract or to other pictorial representations. So here I could see that I've got a part whole model. I can see 11 is my whole. Where would I see the part of 6? Well, I can see the part of 6 in my 6 yellow counters, and the children would engage in that rich dialogue. So really quite an interesting idea there to explore. I understand what you mean there, David. Apologies for that. We do tend to use as one of our manipulatives double-sided counters, and that's what I'm trying to reflect in this, the actual manipulative that we could use with the children. And I wonder where we could see the 5. And could we see it in any other ways? Could we branch off that 6 and see that we've got 2, a 2, and a 2? Could we branch off the 5 and see we've got a 3 and a 2? So we're really starting to expose that composition there. Now, again, it doesn't just have to be with those kinds of counters. We could look at it with fractions. This is another one inspired by Steve Wyverney that I've used quite a lot with what would be my sort of year 5 children. So they're around 9, 10 years old then. And they really love these. They can really go to town with some of these. So if I kept my same target of 11, but this time I've got fraction images involved, then they really start to think, yeah. So they can start to think, well, what can I see in the image that's going to help me unpick what could be underneath the splat? So I could have 2 whole ones and 1 half. That would give me 2.5. I could see that some children are either drawing or discussing the fact that we could see that's 1, add 1, add a half. We could see it in a slightly different way. There might be some children that see it slightly differently. And these images, really important to sort of highlight the fact that some of them are orientated slightly differently. So it just gets them thinking about that example of 2.5 in a non-standard way. So we're starting to think about examples, not just that are the obvious and standard examples, but that we're drawing out of that comfort zone and going into the non-standard representations as well. So here we can see 1 and 3 halves. So we can see 1 whole and 3 halves. We could see 1 add a half, add a half, add a half, and we could keep on going. So there's lots of different ways. Now this really does start to develop and enhance flexible thinking, which is so important within mathematics. I know Fiona mentioned about those interlinking concepts and topics, but flexible thinking around those is so vital as well with our young mathematicians. But there are other ways that we could explore this too. It doesn't just have to be based around an image. It could be a calculation. Now, what I'm going to do is ask you to engage in a little activity with me. So I want you to think, I'm going to give you a question. And when you see that question, I don't want you to jot anything down. I'd like you to be really honest about this and have a go in your head. So calculate it mentally for me. And then I'd like you to type in the chat box, how did you do it in your head? But don't press enter for me. Don't press that return button, because what we're going to do is a chat blast. So I'm going to give you some really good thinking time and time to type in that chat box. How did you do this? This would be that sort of, I'm trying to replicate what it could be in the classroom. So piece of research that our Multi-Academy Trust took part in actually showed that the average amount of time that children were given for thinking time in 2015 was around 0.8 seconds after a question was asked before a teacher intervened. That's quite quick, isn't it? I'm not going to give you that short amount of time because we've since developed that and enhanced that. And what we're doing is we're trying to think, how can we give longer thinking time to promote more discussion? If you want the children to talk about something, you need to give them time to think about what they're going to say, because otherwise being put on the spot quite quickly might not generate that solid discussion that we want to really draw out those metacognitive moments from them. So I'm going to give you a question, have a go at it in your head, type in the chat box, but don't press enter yet, okay? So here's the question. Calculate mentally 18 multiplied by 5. I don't want to know the answer. I want to know, how did you do it in your head? I'm going to give you 10 taps of my hand, and then I want to see your answers. So don't press enter just yet. Okay, that was 10 taps of my hand. I'd love to be able to see some of your thoughts and suggestions. Go for the chat blast now. Wow, look at all those coming in. So I can see 20 multiplied by 5 there. So some people have increased 18 by 2 lots of 5 and then subtracted. I can see some people are partitioning. So 5 multiplied by 10 plus 5 multiplied by 8. Some people are timesing by 10. So 18 times by 10 and then halve it. Lovely, really interesting ideas. Thank you so much for taking part in that. I can see so many coming through. It's really hard to see all of them, but there's some very familiar ones. Take a look back yourselves. I think one of the most common ones seems to be that partitioning structure, where some people are thinking of 18 as 10 multiplied by 5 and then 8 multiplied by 5. I think that one seems to be one of the most popular ones there. But imagine doing this in class. So again, different ways that the children can think about this. Have they got one way and that they're solid with it? Have that discussion, but also the EEF talked about modelling and the use of modelling. So let's just have a look at what that might look like. Now we could model our thinking through pictorial representation. So here I've taken that partitioning structure that a lot of people mentioned, And I've created 10 times 5 is 50 and 8 times 5 is 40. So there we're going to see that we add the two parts together and we get the result of 90. Okay, so interesting that I wasn't really focusing too much on the end result at the beginning, the answer. I was focusing on how did you do it? That's going to promote that discussion. So that's one way that some children might come up with. Another way that I saw in the chat box as well was 18 multiplied by 10. We can see there I've got my area model and I've got my abstract alongside. So the children can make those links and see those connections. This just helps those children that have not thought about it mentally in this way, visualize it. So perhaps they might be able to use it another time. So we can see there the same result of 90. Some people increased it by 2 lots of 5, so went to the nearest multiple of 10, thinking about 20 times 5, and then subtracting the 10 there. So using those known facts, 20 times 5, and then subtract 10. Some people might have partitioned 18 into, again, known facts of 9 times 5 and 9 times 5. So we can see we've got it there. All of these images and representations, though, all perfectly valid. All help us to see the mathematics that's going on in a really bog standard question, to be honest with you. It's just a simple arithmetic, isn't it? But actually that discussion and that rich engagement around it really, really helps the children. I always think that that's a really nice activity on its own. But if you were to follow it up with something that gave this activity a little bit more purpose, then it can really have great impact in teaching and learning. Now, what I mean by that is, if I give you another question to answer mentally, I want you to think again, what strategy did you use? How did you do it? Did your strategy change compared to the 18 times 5? And why do you think your strategy changed? So we're going to do another chat blast. Again, I'm going to give you some of that thinking time with the taps of my hand, but have a go mentally at this and let's see what we notice this time. So first of all, calculate mentally 197 multiplied by 5. How did you do it? Don't press enter just yet. I'll give you that thinking time. Okay, press enter. Let's see your ideas flash up. Wonderful. Some people are saying last time, it's different. Yeah, didn't consider partitioning, Margaret, at all. Just, I wonder if you partitioned last time then. Lots of people actually going for the approach of 200 multiplied by 5 to give 1,000 and then subtract 3 lots of 5. Interesting. I wonder if people would have gone for that approach had we not discussed it and shared it on the screen. So imagine doing that in your classroom where you're modelling it live on the board. These are a couple of strategies. You wouldn't need to go through 6 or 7 different ways if you didn't want to. When I've introduced something like this, just picking 3 different ways is really great as that entry into it. And Kristen there has mentioned partitioning would be more time consuming for this. Yeah, I imagine as well for this question, that cognitive overload is going to be a moment, I think, for some children with this question. So they're trying to hold 100 times 5 in their head, 90 times 5 in their head, and 7 times 5, and then remember all 3 to try and add them together. It's going to be a bit of margin for error in there, isn't there? It's a lot greater, the margin for error, than if we think about it as to the nearest multiple of 100. So really interesting. Mary, exactly. Partitioning would have too many facts to try and remember. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, automatically partition if 2 known facts. If there's more, no thank you. Really interesting there from Margaret. So different strategies because of the different size of numbers, but now we're starting to think metacognitively here, and we're discussing our thoughts metacognitively with each other. do we do that with the children in our classroom? Do we talk about why both strategies would work, but why is one more effective than another? Yeah, Carlos mentioned, would we do 187 multiplied by 5 differently? I think this is a really important point where we think about actually it's the questions that we link together and that question design as part of our lesson. And you can see here how this would then lead on to, if we are thinking about area and perimeter, we've already looked at that model of the area model with an arithmetic example here. You could see how it would develop into a lesson. It might just be a lesson that's focusing purely on the multiplicative laws and the reasoning associated with it. But do we model our thinking with children enough so that they can then share their thinking with us? We've looked at how we've planned our approach, we've discussed that, why our approach changed, we've reflected on it. Interesting, a lot of people this time didn't put the answer to the question in, just told me how they did it, which was really great because that's that mindset thing of, I speak to so many children where they say, do you know what? I don't enjoy maths as much as things like English or geography or history because there's just always one right answer. So it's either right or wrong. But now we're opening up that creativity through that discussion. Okay, so with that in mind, what I'm going to do is think carefully now about sharing some of our other strategies for developing talk with you. Now, some of you might be familiar with these materials that I'm about to share with you. Some of you might not be. These are our free schemes of learning that you can find on our website, whiterosemaths.com. Now, these free schemes of learning are broken down into carefully sequenced small steps, just as Fiona was talking about earlier. A lot of our team work very closely with the NCETM and with Maths Hubs, and so we've very much taken that approach through the Mastery for Teaching for Mastery approach. Now, you'll see here, this example is a Year 2 example, based on the English National Curriculum, if I'm honest with you. We have broken it down into terms and into approximate weeks of that term. Now, this is the block based on number and fractions, and you can see that at the top there. This is a small step based around find a third. Now, just to give you a bit of context, before this, they've done lots of work based around halves, quarters, recognising a third comes before finding a third as well. And a small step doesn't have to be one lesson. Okay, so this small step is just a part of that greater learning journey. So here, what we tend to do is we give notes and guidance on the first part of our page. So it tells us what they're going to be doing, what the point of that small step is. But then we also have a specific section based around mathematical talk. Now, Fiona actually mentioned this in her session as well and talked a lot about the importance of talk, but also the importance of questioning and getting that effective questioning going. Well, here we've tried to link some of our questioning to some of our varied fluency questions here, but some of them are more general. Some of them are things that you would be able to transfer into other questions if you didn't use these as well. As well as that, on our scheme of learning, what we do tend to offer are some STEM sentences too. So these are really nice to help develop talk within your classroom because the children can feel confident that they've got a structure that they can use to frame their thinking and frame their discussion. So we can see here, I've just highlighted where we might have our STEM sentences too. These might be classed as a closed sentence as well in some areas. So there's different ways that we can think about those. But not just with our scheme of learning do you get this one page, you also get, and there's the link to where you find it, you also get the reasoning and problem solving page as well. Now, these are, like I say, all free on whiterosemaths.com. And what we have are a couple of reasoning and problem solving questions where actually you would be able to then take them, have a go with the children, develop and craft a lesson around them and use them for discussion as well. Now, Feedback from our teachers that were using our schemes when we first put them out said we'd love to be able to take these questions and use them on the board, but we're having to spend time snipping tooling them, dragging them up, and then we can't edit or change them. So what we did was, on our website, where you'll find our premium scheme, our primary schemes of learning, we added an additional download section. So you can download full terms, or you can download some PowerPoints. Now, these PowerPoints are for all the reasoning and problem solving questions that you see. You'll be able to download those as editable PowerPoint slides. So they're really super useful. They look like this. So, but all of these words, images are completely editable. They're not locked down. So you can change anything about them. They also have at the side, when you're not in presenter mode, in the grayed out area of PowerPoint, if there's anything that's really useful that will help with these questions, it has it in there. So I'm just thinking, for some of the money questions, we put certain coins on the screen in the question, but if you wanted to change those coins, you can just drag them in from the grayed out area. So they're all really useful as well. In terms of these sorts of questions for developing talk, though, I think what's really great about our resources is that you can use them for all children. So all children can access reasoning and problem solving, but through using some of our editable materials. Now, I'm going to exemplify what I mean by that next, just after we've looked at this quote by Black and William, who talk in there. It's a brilliant book, so I'm just trying to get the name of it right, because I always end up getting it the other way around. So Working Inside the Black Box is where I've taken this from. And it's that eavesdropping. It's what I would be doing if I was in the room with you right now and I set a task. I go round and I listen in and I work out, oh, they've got a good discussion, I'll come to them next. Or, oh, they partly know something, but they haven't got it fully. I'm going to come to them and try and delve a little bit deeper and get a little bit more out of them. That eavesdropping is a great tool to use when children are all talking in the classroom. Just give yourself a minute, walk around, have a listen, and it can really help your assessment and inform your assessment for learning. It helps because you're then able to see which pupils are possibly struggling. So here, for example, what we tend to advocate when we're eavesdropping in and we've set a task off, we might have the pieces of ribbon, so it's all practical on the tables. Piece of paper to exemplify the ribbon, because that's easier to cut as well. And then the children start chatting and you think, oh, that child really just needs a little bit more. Here's where the enabling prompts can come in. So it could be that we facilitate a discussion around where could we start. Now, I have a little problem with asking a child that hasn't started that question, because if they knew where to start, they would have probably already started. But I really like asking that question to the person that sat next to them that has started, and they can hear somebody else's thinking then. It's not coming from the teacher, coming from a peer, and it gets them chatting away. We could also talk about how many thirds are in the whole ribbon, so that helps us start that task. How could we act this out? Can we get the children acting as Annie, and what has she done, so that they can physically understand the context of that? Lots of discussion all the time with these kinds of questions. They're not made for being given and then just answered independently on their own as such. They're for facilitating that learning environment within the classroom. You can alter the measurements. So if some children are struggling with the fact that it's 6 centimetres, then bringing it to an approach where we're using 2 centimetres might make it a little bit easier for them to understand, because the mathematics isn't as hard. They might not understand the repeated addition of 6 to help them with their thirds, for example, but when we take it down to 2 centimetres, that might help them. We could use a particular math strategy. I know that Fiona mentioned about bar models in hers, and actually we've popped on the editable slide for this question just a blank bar model at the side, and it looks like that, so that you can just drag it over and say, right, how could we label it? That might be enough, just drawing that with them and having that there might be enough to get them started. Or you might need to help them fill in some of the blanks. So what could we label? What does the 6 represent here? What's the question mark? Why do I need to find out what the question mark is? Why is that important? What information does that tell me? All these questioning prompts that really start developing that discussion are so powerful in class. So we can see there, we can complete our bar model with our children and start to think, well, is that it? We've done a bit of maths now. Are we moving on? Well, let's reflect back on the question. How long would half the ribbon be? So how can we find half of 18? And again, there's multiple ways that children might do this, but the children that I work with on a daily basis are really familiar with using concrete manipulatives. I've been teaching remotely for the last few months, so I'm surrounded right now by whiteboards and different things I can use, like chocolate eggs and yeah, cubes. Counters are not as easy to hold up on the screen, hence why I have cubes, because they're easier, but you can show them and the children can use them when face to face as well. And how do we show what half of that ribbon would look like? So different ways that we can use our questions to really get a little bit more talk going there. I can see, oh, I think someone's just unmuted there. Sorry, guys. And we can see there, I've just popped a short list. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's just a few ideas there that we've got for questions or techniques to try and enable pupils to access our problems that might be struggling. But there are some children that will come to a question like this and go, finished. And then the temptation, I think, is to just give them another question and keep them ploughing on through content. But actually, let's get them delving deeper into a context. So if we have this context of the piece of ribbon that Annie has got, what else could we do with this piece of ribbon? Well, now we've got these editable PowerPoints, we could change part of this ribbon and think, well, actually, let's change a bit of the information and alter it slightly so that if she cuts it into 2 equal parts, half is worth 6, how long would a third be? How does that change the child's thinking? Can they explore where they're going to start? Can they explore what they're going to draw? Could they draw the bar model for the original question and the bar model for this new question alongside each other and discuss the similarities and differences between the two? So there's different ways that you could alter the question to really elicit more discussion, but also depth of understanding around the context. What about condensing a bit of that information and thinking, right, I'm going to change something about it, but I'm just going to give them a little bit less as well and see if they can explore that context again, have they've got a real good understanding of what it is. So a quarter of the ribbon is 6 centimetres long. How long would a third be? We can really start developing those discussions. These techniques, though, really do support our tagline and our mantra of maths everyone can. So we're not saying, oh, that group of children won't be able to do that question that everybody else is doing, so I'll give them something different. Actually, our thinking is, what can we do to really help the children access that question if they're struggling, or go deeper with that question if we think that actually they've understood it? And here are a few more techniques to be able to extend. I love the idea of removing a little bit of information as well, so that they, in the context, if you gave them what typically would be the answer, they would have to remove a little bit of that information. So if I just go back and explain a little bit of what I mean. So if the child is saying 9 centimetres is the answer, if we said, for example, right, so let's call it 15 centimetres there, and we blocked out our 6 centimetres here, can they work backwards and find what a third of the ribbon would be then? So different ways that you can really take out some of that information and alter the information. You could interleave different topics as well. So we've started thinking about measurement with our fractions there. You might think about money. So how would it change with the representations of money? What about the coins that we used, and so on? So there's different ways that we can really get the children extending their thinking through just questioning prompts, verbal discussion within the classroom. It's a really handy way to think about it. This one again, another sort of question here, and thinking really sort of carefully when you have a go at using some of these techniques in the classroom. I think one of the biggest things that's had impact for me and the colleagues that I work with and the schools that I support and lead in developing change within mathematics in their teaching is part of their planning is now have a go at the question. So if they were going to be giving this question to a group of children, their first thing is to have a go at it so that they're not having a go in the room with the children at the time. They can then preempt any sort of questioning and talk that would enable and any questioning and talk that would be used for extending. It's always a really nice one, this. I think some people hopefully might be having a bit of a go at it as we're talking. We've got those 3 number lines and where 36 would possibly go on them. Which one of those number lines do you think is the easiest? Top, middle or bottom? Just out of interest, top, middle or bottom? Pop in that chat box, what do you think? Ooh, the bottom one, some people are saying the middle. I think quite interestingly, children would probably start top to bottom. And for us as teachers to realise that the bottom one is probably the easier one because the difference isn't as large, it's not as great. Actually, we might want to reorder the number lines for some children in that case. When we start thinking about our planning, we could start thinking about asking questions like, which is the easiest and most difficult? What can you mark on? That's something that we automatically do as adults, but do we elicit that? Do we speak metacognitively about that with the children? Do we say why we're putting our halfway marks on there and things? If we're thinking about extending, it's quite interesting to get the children to think about some of these ideas and have that discussion with each other around, well, if we were to draw our number lines and we're putting the same number on each of those number lines, how could yours be different to mine? So they could have a comparison. Maybe the children have that discussion about why the number 36 changes its position every time, and they can have that discussion rather than just filling it in and moving on to the next question and rapidly like moving through questions doesn't always elicit that talk that we want in the classroom and that depth of understanding. Some of these simple questioning techniques really can develop that talk within our classrooms. So what other sorts of support can White Rose Maths offer? Well, we have our free schemes of learning that I've already mentioned with that mathematical talk box highlighted. We don't just have them for primary, we have them for secondary. We also have them for reception as well. We've recently revamped our reception and put them into themes and topics. And you can see we've got very similar guidance, prompts for learning that really develops talk and questioning as well. Different ideas for the different areas in your environment as well. So your sand and water, your construction, outdoor areas are always mentioned as well. And we have key questions in our digging deeper section as well, which really does what it says on the tin. For those children that you think have got a solid understanding, can we push them to go a little bit deeper? So some real practical activities that we've got there as well. We also have, now these ones are not free, but we do have a premium resource subscription, which has PowerPoints. It links to our free home learning videos, which you may or may not have seen. They're brilliant as well. They've been used for a lot of, like I say, home learning and remote teaching, but actually for getting teachers to reflect on why have they picked to use a 10 frame to represent that and not a bead string, for example, is also really great. So we've seen them being used for CPD as well. They link quite closely with the NCETM's guidance, as well as the DEF guidance around the ready to progress criteria. We've made links to that. So that was released in terms of like that COVID recovery kind of thing. But actually, again, it's just going back to it's a really useful tool. These ones are this is just like a worksheet sample. I've never actually used it as a full-on worksheet printed and given. I've used it and snipped the questions. These symbols really help as well. So we can see here we've got a discussion question here asking about explaining. This one would be good to use manipulatives. We've got, I'm just going to move my chat box. We've got a deeper thinking question here. So you can see that symbol there. So there's different things that are available to use on our premium resource side of things as well, such as these true or false questions. These are really great because these pick out interesting misconceptions that children might have. So here we've got a true or false question about I cannot make a rectangle from an odd number of squares. And you can see an example of how we might explore it, but then they also come with a suggested answer as well, and how we can share with the children different ways to really challenge misconceptions. So we've tried to think quite carefully around that, and they're really great for that discussion. So I know I'm coming close to the end of my time, so I don't want to push my luck too much, but I just want to end with a little bit of a summary around today's really rapid virtual conference session around talk. So if we're thinking about developing effective talk in the classroom, and if we get it embedded, then think back to when we were looking at like 18 times 5 and 197 times 5. Those methods and strategies are being learned from peers. So like Fiona said, it's not always coming from teacher talk. If teachers are quiet and give the children a little bit of opportunity, then we can learn from each other as well. And it really starts to develop that flexible thinking around different types of questions. We also are able, if we get that talk-rich environment, to support all students to reason and problem solve, something that I'm so passionate about, really getting the most out of our learners and not putting that ceiling on them. It goes back to that growth mindset thing that somebody mentioned in the chat box earlier as well. And also, I hope that you've noticed that all the way through it, it gives us that more secure understanding when we're putting our assessment for learning strategies in place of what actually is it that the children know, partly know, and don't know yet. So it gives us that more accurate picture of children's understanding. Now, I hope that you've really enjoyed the session. I hope there's been something that's been practical that you could take away with you as well. I've been working in schools for 15 years now, led maths throughout many different guises, different schools. And I think that all the way through my experience, I've really gained that understanding of talk can be one of the biggest things that opens up doors for children when it comes to mathematics. So sometimes it can be a real sort of one of those small steps, I think, that Fiona was mentioning about. If there's something that we're wanting to change in our lessons and change in our school to improve teaching and learning, maybe it's one of those things that we really start to think about for a term of how can I enhance talk in my classroom? And then if we're here as maths leaders, how can we move outside of our classroom and encourage other people in our school to improve talk as well? Now, my email address is there. I can see lots of people commenting there. That's really nice and kind. Thank you very much. Feel free to jot that email address down. If you've got any questions or anything like that about White Rose Maths, that's absolutely fine. What I'm going to do is I'm also going to pop a little evaluation form into the chat box as well. I'm just going to stop sharing to be able to do that, just so that I can paste that in there. And it just gives me a little bit of a flavour for how you felt today has gone in terms of the session. We do hope to come back again to be able to deliver some more training, which would be amazing. So there is a lot of opportunities for online training, as well as we have different sort of videos that we do and things like that too. So please do feel free to let us know in that chat box. I'll just paste that in again. It's just a Google Forms. It'll only take a minute to drop in there. This has been a primary session. I can see somebody's mentioning secondary as well. We do have secondary specific stuff, so feel free to get in touch with me and we can sort something out for that. But yeah, have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of it. I've loved it. I loved it last year when I came to the university. So hopefully we'll be able to see each other face to face again in the future too. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. Really
Oh, you're
interesting,
welcome.
and I know that we've got some secondary colleagues in the room, the virtual room.
Yeah.
As a primary and secondary person, you know what? The things you talked about thinking time, you talked about modelling, you talked about the importance of questioning, questioning prompts to promote discussion, worked examples, which is something I think is vitally important, no matter whether you're primary or secondary. And I think one of my key things I'm going to take away is that teachers need to be quiet.
Yeah. I think in one of that thinking time where I was tapping my hand, that's me telling myself to be quiet, because I'm sat in my kitchen right now just talking to a screen. So it's very unnerving having silence, and it feels like that sometimes in the classroom. So I tap my leg in the classroom, but on screen I've now started with the children to tap my hand. It just gives that moment, doesn't it?
Excellent, excellent. No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Really great way to start our morning. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm just going to go back to that slide because somebody's just asked if I can put my email address back up there. So it's just there. We've also got support@whiterosemaths.com too. So if it's more of a general question, I'll type that in the chat box so that you can see it. Feel free to email them too. It's hard to type and chat at the same time, isn't it?
It is.
There we go.
Lots of things all at once.
Yeah.
Never mind. No, great stuff. Thank you again. And everybody who is presently in the room, I'm sure you'll be willing to give Sarah some rounds of applause that we can do. There we go.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Excellent. Oh, fantastic. Really, really enjoyed that. I'm thinking, how am I going to be able to do that later on when it's my turn to present?
Oh, it would be fab. Just to let you know, someone has asked, Yvonne has just mentioned, do we know how widespread it's used in Scotland? Scottish border schools, I don't know where you're based, Yvonne. I've just been working with the Scottish border schools, and it's really starting to become quite prominent within Scottish borders. It would be a really nice idea actually just to pop in the chat box if we've got a second or two, just to say whereabouts you're from, and if you use it, then Yvonne can see. But we do have training that's being delivered across Scotland at the moment that people are booking in for after school twilights and things. So yeah, it's becoming more and more popular, Yvonne, I think, there, more and more utilised.
Great. Okay, so everybody that's out there in virtual land, your next workshop will be starting in, I think it's about 10 minutes time. And all you need to do is come out of this session, leave this session, and then click back into the clickable PDF into your next session, and that should take you directly to the waiting room of the next session that you're into. So by all means, please do that. What I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you this right now. If you're sitting in here waiting for the next presentation to begin, because I know we've got yeah, I'm punting you out to the waiting room. So just to let you know that is going to happen. Okay. I will let you all back in for Roisin, who is our next presenter in just a few moments time. Okay, everybody. So thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, again. Really appreciate your time. And well, enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully.
Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah, thank you so much. If you're thinking there's going to be bonus material and that's what you're hanging around for, it's not happening. So you're going to need to leave before you're kicked out. I'm going to leave now as well. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody.